गुड मॉर्निंग फ्रेंड्स, दोस्तों। गुड मॉर्निंग। मैं आपके साथ बात करने वाला हूँ एक बहुत इम्पॉर्टेंट बैटल के बारे में जो सेकेंड वर्ल्ड वॉर में फॉट हुआ था, एंड दैट इज़ द बैटल ऑफ मनीला। और ये बैटल बहुत इम्पॉर्टेंट है आजकल के टाइम में भी, बिकॉज इट इज़ ए साइन कि व्हाट कुड हैपन इन द बैटल इन यूक्रेन, इन कीव, or for that matter, the battle in the Gaza Strip. I mean, it is quite possible कि ये जो मनीला में हुआ था could happen there also. So let us look at the Battle of Manila. मनीला जो है आप जानते हो इज द कैपिटल ऑफ द फिलीपींस, और ये एक बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट बेस था फॉर बोथ फॉर द अमेरिकन्स एंड द जापानीज वर कीन टू कैप्चर इट। जब 3 दिसंबर 1941 में जापानीज फ्लीट अटैक्ड पर्ल हार्बर एंड डेसिमेटेड द अमेरिकन फ्लीट, तो इमीडिएटली उन्होंने उसी वक्त तो अमेरिकन फोर्सेस थी फिलीपींस में were told to get ready for a Japanese invasion. और the Japanese commander in chief of the navy was Admiral Yamamoto, and Yamamoto ने डिसाइड किया कि फिलीपींस को ख़त्म कर देना चाहिए, एंड पर्पस वाज दैट द एयरफोर्स जो थी विच वॉज अंडर कंट्रोल ऑफ जनरल मकार्थर, इसको न्यूट्रलाइज कर दिया जाए, यानी मेक इट ए बिग ज़ीरो, so that the Japanese could have an extended defense line for their home islands. Accordingly, I think just a few days after the Battle of Pearl Harbor, the Japanese struck the Philippines, and on 8th of December 1941, they attacked Manila and they occupied it without much of a fight. और उस टाइम जो कमांडर था जापानीज फ्लीट का, he was General Homa. And Homa remained in charge for a couple of years in the Philippines. He was a very cruel man, बहुत ruthless आदमी था. And when he was there in charge, a lot of things happened which should not have happened. यानी जो conduct of the war of the Japanese was absolutely very poor, and they committed untold atrocities, killed so many people, raped so many women, and this was probably they thought as part of their culture. पर मुझे ये बात में समझ नहीं आई, बिकॉज जैपनीज जो है दे वर बेसिकली बुद्धिस्ट, एंड लॉर्ड बुद्धा डजंट बिलीव इन दीज थिंग्स, बट जैपनीज कैरिड आउट दीज एट्रोसिटीज विच हैव गॉट नो एक्सप्लेनेशन वट एवर। तो जेंटलमैन, ये बैटल खत्म हुआ। जनरल मकार्थर जो थी हुआ दी कमांडर इन चीफ ऑफ द पैसिफिक, ही एस्केप्ड फ्रॉम देयर विद द स्किन ऑफ हिज टीथ, ran away. Probably he should have stayed and fought there. That is my view. But the decision for him was made by the high command, that is President Roosevelt and General Marshall in Washington, and they said, you better go and come back again. And before leaving, MacArthur reportedly made a statement that I'll come back and throw the Japanese out. Well, he kept to his word. So then began, as I told you, the occupation of the Philippines by the Japanese. And as you all know, it was a very, very brutal occupation. It is well documented. And Philippines जो थे, they did not know कि हम शाम तक जिंदा रहेंगे या नहीं रहेंगे, and the girls were absolutely petrified of the Japanese, and that fear has continued even now when the Philippines, and this time Japan is substituted by China, they are in a head-to-head confrontation. Well, gentlemen, in 1945 February, the Japanese were slowly losing their islands all over to the Allies, in particular the Americans, and then it was decided that, well, Manila will also be attacked. So Manila's command was given to General Yamashita, and there was another man who was in charge there, was Vice Admiral Ibuguchi. These are two men who are very pivotal factors in the defense of Manila at that time from the Japanese point of view. But जो commander in chief of Japanese army था, General Yamashita, when he investigated and had a look at the defenses of the city, he realized कि ये city is not defensible, and उसने एक बहुत अच्छा military decision लिया. He said we will evacuate the city so that civilian casualties do not take place. हालांकि ये आदमी का रिकॉर्ड भी कोई अच्छा नहीं था. As long as he was the commander in the Philippines, a lot of atrocities were committed under his rule. even under General Homa's rule, when General Homa was the military governor. And Homa was tried as a war criminal, and finally he was given the option to be shot, and he was shot by the American military police in a jungle close to Manila. And before that, his wife had appealed to General MacArthur a number of times that please spare his life, but MacArthur didn't relent, and so General Homa was executed. And same fate awaited Matsushita. Unfortunately, he was hanged in 1946 as a war criminal. Now, as far as the defense of Manila is concerned, credit must go to General of the Imperial Army that he agreed that the place was indefensible and he decided to withdraw his troops from there into the mountains. And there he did carry out a successful defense. And mind you, he carried on the defense in that Luzon Hills there, despite the surrender of Japan after the atomic bombs had been dropped on them. Finally, of course, he was caught, he was tried as a war criminal and then hanged. Now, as far as Manila is concerned, after the Japanese Imperial Army had vacated the city, there was one other person, he was Ibuguchi, he was the vice admiral of the Japanese fleet, and he decided, I'm not going to go from there, I'm going to stay here and fight. And he had a couple of thousand soldiers with him, which he swore by what he thought, and a few stragglers from the Imperial Army joined him, and they all got ready for the defense of Manila. The Americans now decided that the only way they could capture Manila was a frontal attack, so heavy artillery bombardment started, and during this infighting, which continued for about a month, I think more than 100,000 Philippines got killed. This is very sad, but I presume there would be no quarter given and none expected. But the fact remains that the Americans really had no choice. I mean, if you look at the whole issue, because Ibuguchi was not going to surrender. He didn't want to surrender. And he was holding on like the old imperial ethos of the Japanese army, which is never surrender, even if you die. And ultimately, he did commit suicide after he had lost the battle. But that 1 month was a very, very harrowing battle because there was a lot of street fighting on between the Americans and the Japanese fleets. And there was fighting all around. And a number of places changed hands. And the Japanese fought ferociously. But they lacked firepower. They lacked air cover. And that was their doom. They also didn't have much of heavy artillery, which the Americans used to great purpose. And the superior firepower of the Americans carried the day, and the Japanese Imperial Army was decimated there. I think almost hundreds of thousands of Japanese soldiers perished fighting to the last man, and very few surrendered. As I told you, the commander of the garrison at that time, Vice Admiral Ibuguchi, he committed suicide, and the other gentleman, General Yamashita, who had run away into the mountains with his troops, ultimately, though he held on against the Americans in the hills, but there was no choice for him, and ultimately he was captured. He had to surrender because when he came to know that the Imperial Army in Japan and the Emperor had surrendered, or the atomic bombs had been dropped on them. So he was also tried as a war criminal later and executed. The atrocities of the Japanese, I mean, all are well known. I mean, there's no point in repeating them here. And the only thing I'll say is that it is something which a person who believes in chivalry will never do. You don't go around killing innocent people or carrying away some girls for your own fun and handing after you hand them over to troops who will, use them in such a way, ultimately many died in that process itself. And it's a bit of a surprise that the Japanese who profess to be followers of Lord Buddha and Buddhists could resort to this sort of activities. Well, gentlemen, the Battle of Manila was one of the very hallmark battles, and it rivals the massacres which took place in the Battle of Berlin and the Battle of Warsaw. These are two places which were devastated during the Second World War in Europe, and the same thing happened in Manila. There is no other city in Southeast Asia which faced such terrible retribution from, maybe I will say, God. I don't know for what for, but even now the Philippines are really mighty scared when they think of those times when the Japanese occupation was on in of their islands. So Manila was finally taken over by the American troops, and then it was thought that the time had come to mount a springboard operation on Japan, and that is how they began to move into the attack on the Japanese homeland. Well, that's another story, but the battle in Manila didn't last more than 30 days. It's for 1 month, but 1 month was a harrowing time. The American, of course, with regard to life, didn't want to needlessly kill their troops, so they would always attack a particular position with superior firepower and superior artillery cover and air cover, soften up the Japanese defenses, and then move in. Most of the Japanese soldiers defending Manila under Ibuguchi died on the post, that is, fighting the Americans. I mean, it was a fruitless fight. I couldn't understand when the result is inevitable. They could have been saved their lives and put themselves at the mercy of the Americans and surrendered. They didn't do that. But of course, the commanders were going to pay a price. So Ibuguchi knew that if he's captured by the Americans, the United States will be tried as a war criminal and hanged. And so he committed suicide. And as far as Admiral Yamashita, who was earlier known as the Tiger of Malaya, because he was the man who negotiated the surrender of Singapore, and then, despite all his assurances, there was a massacre there. And in the Philippines, there were so many massacres. We know about the Bataan March, and so many accounts are available of the Americans being just shot dead and, being buried in makeshift graves on the beaches. And it's not something which worth talking about, but something we must remember, because it was a battle of hatred, a battle of ethos, a battle of culture in the Philippines, and in particular Manila. So whatever happened in Manila, let's hope it doesn't happen again. But the signs are ominous, because the Israelis are moving into the Gaza Strip, and they could do the same thing there if Hamas doesn't surrender. And Kyiv is also likely to be under siege. I don't know what's going to happen there. We'll have to wait and see. Well, gentlemen, I'll close now on this short account of the Battle of Manila, which is the greatest, I would say the most devastating battle in Southeast Asia in the history of the world. That is a city battle, an urban battle. Well, gentlemen, if you like my channel, please share it with your friends, and do subscribe to my channel. Come back for more. In the meanwhile, I'll say goodbye and God bless.